millions of people have been secretly sterilized around the world without their knowledge or consent. History and current reports prove and support this fact. The plan to control and reduce the population of certain tribes, peoples, and nations used to be the aim and desire of many governments and institutions. The methods and approach may change over the years, but honestly, the plan remains the same. Population control is not a conspiracy theory, but a fact grounded in history and supported by many governments around the globe. Even as I write, forced population control is ongoing in some countries. Initially, the desire to control the population of certain tribes, groups of people, and races was done to take away their land, as in Australia and North America and in the Armenian Genocide, and to keep them from multiplying to become a dominant force. Such forced population control policies were rampant and done through wars that killed thousands of people. Genocides. Indeed, genocides have almost mostly been carried out to reduce and remove a certain race and tribe in order to have one race or tribe become dominant in a country. The Armenian Genocide was the systematic destruction of the Armenian people and identity in the Ottoman Empire during World War I. Spearheaded by the ruling Committee of Union and Progress, or CKP, it was implemented primarily through the mass murder of around 1 million Armenians during death marches to the Syrian desert and the forced Islamization of others, primarily women and children. Millions of Armenians who were pushed into the Syrian desert died from starvation. Their rotting bones are always being exhumed. These Armenian children died from starvation in the desert after being pushed there by the Ottoman Empire from Turkey. However, with the onset of eugenics, the reason for population control changed, although the methods remained the same. The use of eugenics as a means to stop some people from giving birth became popularized in America and spread throughout Western Europe. In America, proponents of eugenics began pushing for the forced sterilization, destroying a person's ability to give birth, of criminals, the deaf and blind, drunkards, poor people, people with mental disease, disability or paralysis, autism, and epilepsy. The arguments of these supporters of eugenics were that these socially unfit individuals would transfer their bad genes of diseases, poverty, crime, deafness, blindness, paralysis, alcoholism, immorality, and so on, to their children. Therefore, it was seen as a necessary evil to keep them from giving birth. It was also considered necessary to keep such people from emigrating from other countries to America. Hence, the American eugenics movement was in two folds: to keep people identified as socially unfit from procreating within America, and also keep such individuals from immigrating into America. Take note that people who were bastards, meaning those without married parents or those born out of wedlock, and people who gave birth without being married were seen as immoral, promiscuous, fornicators, and adulterers. Such women were classified as feeble-minded and considered socially unfit to procreate, since it was believed their offspring would also give birth out of wedlock. So, in 1907, Indiana became the first state in the United States to legalize forced sterilization of males and females in prisons as a way to, keep crime from being passed down to their children. After Indiana started, another 31 states also passed sterilization laws of their own. Fornicators, adulterers, prostitutes, bastards, mentally retarded people, criminals, physically disabled people, and so on, were classified as unfit to procreate, and basically fill the world with what were seen as their immoral and disabled genes. Such people were forcefully sterilized or castrated. White people, specifically immigrants from Italy and parts of Eastern and Southern Europe, Latinos, and Asians, were also classified by eugenicists as socially unfit, since they were thought to be more likely to be criminals and drunkards who ended up in prisons. So efforts were made to stop the immigration of people from these countries into the United States by putting in place a quota system that determined how many people could enter the USA from such countries. Additional intelligence tests were also enacted to make sure that only intelligent people from these places were allowed into the USA. The eugenics sentiment in the US was so strong that several presidents and lawmakers were influenced to pass the Federal Immigration Act of 1924. Even though the quota given to these countries was adjusted from time to time, the law actually remained in force until 1965. These forced sterilization laws that were passed by some of the states were unfortunately supported by the Supreme Court in the initial days. This emboldened the states to both secretly and openly castrate or sterilize blacks, Latinos, and Native Americans, as they were mostly poor, uneducated, and thus classified as socially unfit. Indeed, it was argued that the Negro woman was not capable of taking care of or raising a responsible citizen. Therefore, it was necessary, they claimed, to keep black women from giving birth. With this notion, thousands of black women were secretly sterilized without their knowledge or consent. Thousands of Latinos, Black, and Native American Indian women had their wombs removed or their fallopian tubes tied immediately after they gave birth in hospitals, or even when they went to the hospital for minor ailments like the flu or a headache. Some also had IUDs, or birth control devices, placed in their wombs without their consent. Thousands of African American, Latino, and American Indian women were later on the main focus of the eugenic laws. Thousands of these innocent women were secretly sterilized without their knowledge. They had their wombs removed or their fallopian tubes tied permanently without their knowledge. Many hospitals also forced these vulnerable women to undergo these sterilization surgeries before attending to them for even minor ailments. At every opportunity, they were lied to and secretly sterilized without knowing it. In some cases, they would be told that they would not receive any medical attention or even be administered painkillers if they did not consent to have their wombs removed. Such measures were especially rampant in California, where most of these sterilizations took place compared to other states. These forced sterilizations continued and only slightly declined until after the 1970s. However, it is still ongoing today in the United States against illegal immigrants who are detained in immigration facilities, especially in the state of Georgia. Several women who are caught by immigration officials are secretly sterilized in detention facilities against their will, or are forced to do so in order to receive medical attention or to be allowed to remain in the United States. By December of 2020, more than 40 women had come forward with written testimonies stating they received invasive and unnecessary medical procedures while under ICE's care. The attorneys handling these cases reported some of the women faced retaliation for speaking out, including deportation. In 2001, at the age of 24, Kelli Dillon became one of the most recent victims in a history of forced sterilizations in California that stretches back to 1909 and, even served as an inspiration for Nazi Germany's eugenics program. She was only one of the many victims of these secret forced sterilizations that continually occur in the United States. Indeed, as recently as 2001, a black woman called Kelli Dillon was forcefully sterilized in a California state prison because she was deemed as a financial liability for the state and could not support a child. She is among several victims that are still being forcefully sterilized in California prisons without her consent. It is estimated that between 60,000 and 150,000 people were forcefully or deceptively sterilized in the U.S. during the 20th century. Yet some states, 31 states, and the District of Columbia, still have these forced sterilization laws. And in some isolated cases, males who have given birth to many children, 7 in a particular case, and are unable to provide for them, were forcefully sterilized by the court as a plea deal to keep them out of jail. In one case, the man had more than $100,000 in child support debt. He was asked by the court to avoid giving birth again or face harsher punishment. Beginning from California, several U.S. states are now providing compensation to women and men who were forcefully sterilized in their prisons. After eugenics lost its appeal, people had to find another reason to push the idea of population control, poverty, and starvation. It was argued that having too many children will lead to poverty and, at some point, starvation. Stanford University professors Paul and Ann Ehrlich wrote a book titled The Population Bomb in 1968. In this bestseller, these authors argued that unless the world's population was controlled, humanity would overgrow the capacity of the Earth, which would lead to mass starvation and human extinction. They created a picture of woe and, honestly, the end of the human race, unless the population of the world was controlled. Yet, none of those theories and predictions in that book came to pass. It, however, misled the world leaders, and many governments to institute forced population control policies, which affected the lives of many families wrongfully. Millions have been forcefully sterilized and denied the joy of childbirth because of this fear-mongering. Indeed, current climate change activists are also blaming overpopulation as a major cause of environmental degradation and climate change. Hence, the need for reining in the population of humans to save the planet. Professor Paul Ehrlich and Ann Ehrlich wrote a book titled The Population Bomb, which, became a bestseller and influenced the policies and thoughts of many governments around the world. Based on his false predictions that humans will starve to extinction if our populations are not controlled, many governments around the world instituted forced sterilization programs under the guise of family planning to forcefully sterilize millions of people around the world. In many cases, these were done secretly without the victim's knowledge or consent. Paul and Ann Ehrlich advocated for forced and government-controlled population control through compulsory sterilization as a means to save the planet. His views have affected millions of people whose governments adopted this false prediction. The authors have subsequently come under intense attacks and criticism for their alarmist and pessimistic views and predictions. They have come out to apologize and revise some of their predictions and warnings. However, the harm that has been caused by their actions cannot be undone. Indeed, based on these false predictions and suggestions made in this book, the U.S. government adopted and pushed population control in many countries globally as the only means to end poverty. The lives of many men and women have been destroyed by the predictions of Professor Paul and Ann Ehrlich, which influenced governments around the world to forcefully sterilize their populations in order to cut down on the global population. Thus, population control is actually a U.S. government policy, not only in the U.S., but also for the world. This will be fully detailed in the next article, but, suffice to say that the U.S. government sponsors several governments worldwide through the USAID and the World Bank to support free or subsidized sterilization of women and men around the world. This program has been ongoing since the 1960s as a means to reduce the global population. The number of families that have been negatively affected by this policy and deceptive practices are so innumerable, only heaven can tell.